Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to continue with the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. And if you remember, just yesterday we were talking about huge powerful artillery preparation that the Russians conducted over the coal mine South Donbass number 1. A lot of artillery strikes, a lot of aviation strikes, and yesterday we made a conclusion and made a projection that most likely during the upcoming night the Russians would try to attack the territory with a significant number of forces. And this morning we got the first videos. We got the videos of how the Russians were attacking the territory using two groups for attack. For example, in this part of the video we can see how the Russians were bombing the coal mine once again, and right after the Russians began full-scale offensive operation to attack and to take under control the coal mine South Donbass number 1. The Russians once again were using two groups of forces with a significant number of armored vehicles and tanks. The first group of forces were entering from the eastern direction, moving through the village of Vadyana. In this video we can see the attack of the first group. The Russians crossed significant number of fields. As you can see, the fields were completely cleared and demined. No problems and no danger for the Russian forces. Here in this moment they crossed another, let's say, breakpoint and began entering the coal mine itself. So this is the last fields, and we see the coal mine on the horizon. The Russians are entering and taking under control the first building. Right after first wave of attack, the Russians began the second wave of attack. We will return back on map and we will discuss in details how exactly the Russians were moving. And now the Russians are entering the South Donbass coal mine number 3 from the second direction. So now let's return back on map and discuss how exactly the Russians were moving. So as for this area, the Russians were moving through Vadyana. They crossed this point, then the Russians crossed the fields, then the Russians crossed this tree line and enter Vadyana from this point. So this is the building that the Russians captured as a result of attack of the first group of offensive. So this is the road, and this is exactly the progress. The second group was moving from the southern direction. They crossed the fields, they crossed the tree line, they entered the road, and using this road the Russians entered the coal mine from the central part. So based on this video we have adjusted the map, as you can see, and as I understand most of the mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor based on the same event. For now we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to establish complete control over the coal mine, but most likely they are about to do this, or maybe have already done this. So obviously this is a significant victory for the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back further in Bogoyavlenka direction, and the encirclement of Ugledar is coming to the end. Now let's talk about Ugledar itself. To the south of the coal mine South Donbass number 1, we have another video of how the Russians were attacking and FPV droning the Ukrainian forces in this part, which confirms that this object still remains under complete Ukrainian control. I believe we need to adjust the map in Ukrainian favor. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kurakhova direction. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important, we have changes on the ground. The most important events are coming from the northwestern part of Ukrainsk. This is the icon. Let's discuss this in details. And in this video we can see the Russian stormtroopers that were trying to take under control the Ukrainian positions to the northwest of the coal mine and to the west-north of the Terikon of Ukraine. And as a result of the clashes, the Russians managed to take this territory under complete control, and based on this video we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. So once again the Russian soldiers, the Russian stormtroopers were fighting for these trenches, for this dense network of the fortifications, and as a result of clashes the Russians managed to take them. So we don't know for sure for how deep the Russians managed to move in the southern direction, but according to different pro-Russian sources, the Russians conducted two attacks. The first one took place in the northern part, and the second attack took place in the southern part. So summarizing everything, and if we transfer and this line of combat contact in this update to map, we're going to see the following picture. So as a result of clashes during the previous 24 or 48 hours, the Russians managed to establish complete control over these territories of the city of Ukrainsk. So significant progress, as you can see. And once again, the Russians are saying that currently there is a cauldron. The Ukrainians were caught in cauldron without any possibilities to evacuate. The sources are saying that Ukrainians during the previous night made a lot of attempts to escape the cauldron, trying to use the main road, but most of those soldiers who were trying to escape were destroyed on this road. So that's why the Ukrainians lost their positions in the coal mine itself. And currently, according to information we have, the Ukrainians are trying to consolidate their forces on the hill and on the territory of the Terikon. So obviously, significant problem, significant disaster for the Ukrainians. They will not be able to escape this area. The only possible solution for them is to surrender. Most likely, not today, but most likely tomorrow or the day after, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm complete control over the territory, and most likely during the next few hours, maybe one day, the Russians will raise their flag in this territory and we will color the territory completely under complete Russian control. Now let's move to Selido. We have some changes on the ground. Ukrainian sources published the video of how they were FPV droning the Russians in this area, and there are a lot of episodes of how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian forces. Some of them were geolocated, some of them weren't, but those that were geolocated were added on map, and based on the geolocations we have adjusted the territory and the areas in Russian favor. So the Russians established complete control over the southern part, over this territory. The Russians managed to improve their positions to the west on the Ukrainian side of the railways, and the Russians took under control significant territories between the southern foothold and the possible positions of the armed forces of Russian Federation on the landfill of the Karachenka. So significant progress. The Russians were forced to fall back during the previous few weeks. Probably they were, let's say, improving their logistics. Now the Russians improved everything and began offensive with new pressure in the western direction. Now let's talk to Novogrudovka, and today the Ukrainian sources reported that they were forced to retreat from the village of Marinovka. Ukrainian soldiers had to retreat to a depth of 800 meters in order to save their lives and health. The village was almost surrounded for 3 weeks with virtually no logistics. Someday it had to happen because of even heroism has a limit. So the story of this village is very rich. First we had this territory as a contested area, then we had this territory as complete Russian control, then we returned back Ukrainian positions, and now we have report that Ukrainians retreat from the village completely. Most likely today or maybe during the next few hours, the Russians will raise the flag, or Minister of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm complete control over the territory. And if the Russians are able to do this, of course, this will open the gates for the Russians to move further in the southern direction. And if the Russians don't have control over the coal mine and the Terikon of Karachenka, then they will have opportunities to establish control over this territory. Let's talk about Pokrovsk. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the city. We continue receiving significant number of videos and geolocations how the Russians were attacking and destroying the buildings and temporary positions. As we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the city of Pokrovsk would be reduced to ruins, and they will repeat the story of Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and of course Mariupol. Now let's move further. New York, we have additional progress on the ground. We have additional small changes of the contested area to the area under complete Russian control. We have a number of FPV drone attacks on the Russian positions from the armed forces of Ukraine. Some of the attacks took place here, and based on the video we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Now let's move further, and now we are going to the Kursk direction, where the very heavy clashes continue. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Some pro-Russian sources report additional progress and shows additional changes on the ground. So summarizing everything, the Russians established complete control over the village of Darina, and currently the line of combat contact goes along Snagas, the river of Snagas, including the village of Tolsty Lug. So everything that located in between this territory and this red line is already under complete Russian control. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for the village of Lyubimovka, but Ukrainians began showing some resistance. If the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to fall back, then there are very high chances, very high risk that Ukrainians can be encircled by the Russians, because Lyubimovka is not the only target for the Russians. Currently, the Russians are trying to concentrate forces in Darina with the purpose to launch fast lightning attack to the village of Sverdlikova, and if the Russians are able to take the village of Sverdlikova, then this is going to be the end for the Ukrainian offensive, Kursk offensive operation, and this is going to be the end for the significant number of Ukrainian forces that are currently located in this part of Kursk area. As for Sudzha itself, there are no clashes, at least no details, no updates that confirm this. The only thing we have is that the Russians continue hunting and destroying Ukrainian vehicles, abandoned vehicles that Ukrainians were trying to hide. So anyway, the situation here is also not so easy. Now let's move to Glushkova area, where the Ukrainians continue their offensive, and today we got additional details of Ukraine attack. In this video we can see the process, how exactly the Ukrainians were crossing the border, how exactly the Ukrainians were clearing the borderlines, how exactly the Ukrainians were using engineering machine to destroy Russian Dragon Ts, how exactly the Ukrainians were moving through the fields with a significant number of armored vehicles, and today we have adjusted the map in Ukraine favor. Based on this video, the Russians are saying that currently there are very heavy clashes, in the village of Obukhovka and Vesele, and according to information we have, the Ukrainians haven't managed to improve their positions further deep inside of Glushkova area, and that the clashes are taking place in the same triangle, in this area between Novy Put, Obukhovka and Volfino. So this is the area of, let's say, Ukrainian progress, and by the morning of the 14th of September, the Ukrainians haven't managed to improve their position further. Now let's talk about important political events, because if you remember, yesterday we were talking that Putin said that if NATO and Western countries allowed Ukrainians to use long-range missiles, this is going to be like evidence of complete involvement of NATO countries in the conflict. And today we have reports from the permanent representative Nebenzia, UN permanent representative. He said that the West has already made a decision with a very high degree of probability to allow Kyiv to use long-range weapons to strike deep into Russia. NATO countries will start a direct war with Russia if they give Kyiv the green light to use long-range weapons, Russians UN envoy says. And today we start receiving updates from different Western countries. For example, Finland and Sweden allowed the Ukrainian army to fire the weapons at Russia. The only limitation is that the weapons must be used within the framework of international law. Furthermore, the same report we got from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who also stated that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Ukraine should be allowed to strike deep inside Russia, regardless of Moscow threatening that this would draw Canada and its allies into direct war. As for the United States of America, they are still hesitating about this question, but telling the truth, it's something like a theater, because how is it possible that Western countries are allowed to use weapon deep inside the territory Russia without the United States of America? Obviously, everything was allowed by, let's say, first of all, permission from the authorization of the United States of America. The US has not changed its approach to limiting Kyiv's use of US weapons for strike deep into Russia, and does not plan to announce changes today. That was stated by the White House. On the other hand, Zelensky have already prepared something like a peace plan, and he's going to provide this peace plan to Biden. This month, Zelensky will present Biden with a peace plan. There are a few points, but each will depend on the US president. So, and the most important, that this is not just a peace plan, we can say that this is business plan, because according to information we have, the Pentagon has 5.9 billion left to help Kyiv under the PDA program, which involves supplies from existing US weapons stockpiles. So Zelensky is going to provide a business plan and to find a solution how to let's say how to increase the how to establish support and how to save support in the 2025, because as we understand, the 2025 is going to be decisive year for Ukraine. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.